components of happiness are frameworks that always work. They are tools and practices that will bring permanent change to your life for better. We're not looking for temporary solutions. We change and transform. We practice what we preach, and we're gonna share it with you here. Be careful, because you can become seriously happier today. Once again, I really, really appreciate that you found time to talk to me. You're actually one of people who somehow changed the quality of my life. That's what I can say.
Dimitri. Thank you.
Because music has always been a part of my life, but only when I've been to your workshop, only after talking to you, and only after being in the environment that you create, I realized that I do not have to be like super talented musician who has to finish conservatory, I don't know, university, and that I actually can enjoy this.
I think you say something very important here, because I have noticed that in a lot of countries, Russia included, Germany also has this same confusion. There is a concept of the fact that the only way to art, like music or dance or painting or sculpture, has to come with innate talent. And this is very wrong, because if you go back and you start looking at the writings of the early Greek historians, and I'm talking about historians like Herodotus, what do you discover? You discover that every child who went to school, and unfortunately that means male, because in those days women were not encouraged to go to the school, but every child who went to school by the age of 11 was expected to have mastered, notice that word, mastered, a minimum of 2 to 3 instruments. Now, let's stop for a second and think about that. If every child was expected to have achieved that, where does the element of talent come into the subject? And I think I can answer this very simply if you're interested.
I am.
Well, okay, so let me put it this way. There's a confusion between mastery of a language and the communication ability within that language. For example, if I said to you, there's no point in teaching you how to speak English unless you're going to become another Shakespeare, everyone will go, well, that's a crazy statement. Of course, why should you forbid someone to learn a language by saying that the only people that are worthy of that have to reach this very, very high level? For every Shakespeare, there's a million other people who want to learn how to speak, converse with the language, and just use it for everyday communication. So I think there's a problem, there's a confusion between true talent, true artistry, which I think you and I would both agree is in the area of communication, and the mechanical process. Now, if we just isolate the mechanical process for a minute, there are levels. You watch somebody who is a concert level pianist who invests 6 to 7 hours a day of practice. You watch a dancer from the Bolshoi who invests a similar amount of time in order to take very, very high levels of the craft. But if your dream is to be able to pick up a guitar and strum a few songs, or to sit down at a keyboard and play some Beatles, to your friends, why should that have to require the same level of talent? It doesn't. So I think there's a confusion between the mechanical ability and the communication ability. When I hear the word talent, I automatically associate it with creativity, with communication. I think for most people, when they hear the word talent, they confuse it with the mechanical actions, which, as you've now seen in the seminars, it's not something that takes, we do it in 4 days. In 4 days, you've mastered all the basic mechanical concepts. Now, then comes the drilling. but there's not more to learn. It's then repeat the action. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the amazing thing that you did. You made it very clear that it's learnable and learnable within a very short period of time. And I just thought that, for example, my daughter is 3, and I thought, okay, maybe she can become a musician if
Yes.
we start teaching her at 4. That's what was my idea, like from before I met you.
You know, people say to me, what age is the right age to teach it? Now, I have 2 comments on that. One, it's the age when they first reach for the subject. Now, that could be at 3 or 4, or it might not be until they're 15 or 16. But the problem is, it's when the parents want to force the child, then, like every child, is a question of resistance. Now, the second thing is the attention span. People confuse a child's intelligence and their attention span. You can have a child who's incredibly intelligent but doesn't have a very high attention span. Or you can have a child who's has a very high attention span, but it's not very intelligent. Or you can have a child that is both very intelligent and with a high attention span. Of these 3 concepts, the most important is not the intelligence level, it's the attention span. So today, children are being presented in all the various online video, cell phone, films with continuous imagery flashing past incredibly fast. And if you look at the average child, if even for an advertiser, if you could get somebody's attention to hold for 30 seconds, you're doing great. Then you watch teachers try to go in and do it in the traditional manner. Sit the child down for 1 hour in a chair. Oh my God, Moshe, 1 hour in a chair. Why are you punishing me, Father? It's like, if you want a child to learn and you're a parent, perfect. 2 minutes, 3 minutes a day. And then, you give them a little piece of information and the child goes, oh, that was great. Can we do some more? And you go, tomorrow, if you're good. Now, music becomes the reward, not the punishment.
Can I ask you about your personal history on that account? Because I know that you were studying quite fast when you were a kid. Can you please share a little bit on that one?
No, I was a very different kid. And I think today, unfortunately, I would have fallen in the bracket of, he's in the autistic band or he's Asperger's or something. Why? Because people want to label everything. When it's something out of the norm, let's label it. And I was very lucky that I was in a period of time before there was this big surge of labeling people who didn't quite fit into the spectrum. When I was 3 years old, I started to read. Now, here's the thing which is unusual. No one taught me to read. Apparently, according to my mother, the first book I picked up was the Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 1. And I sat there and I started to read it to them. Now, that was my first experience with reading. By the time I was 7.5, I'd finished all 26 volumes. Yeah, I know. You see, so you look at that and you go, oh, what is this? How do we explain it? How does it fit in? I guess I have to thank my parents in certain ways. One of the things my father was very good on, his education was interrupted by the Second World War. So by the time he was 13.5, he'd left school. Was sent away from London because of the continuous bombings and all the rest of it. So he never got a chance to finish his education. So he then took on the role of self-education. And he was an avid reader. I mean, avid. My father had a collection in the house of over 20,000 books. Now, you think about it, an average man, and it was eclectic. It was stuff from not just one area. It was everything from the arts and the humanities to the sciences to religions. And I can still recall going to my father and saying, Dad, what does this mean? And he would say to me, well, have you looked it up in a dictionary? No. Well, go and look it up in a dictionary and then come back. And then I come back to him and he go, I say, well, Dad, there's like 3 definitions. It could mean this or this or this. And he would be like, well, which one do you think it is? Okay, well, use it in a sentence. Does that make sense to you in the context of what you just read? Yes, yeah. Okay. And where does the word come from? What do you mean? Well, do you see at the bottom here? It is Greek origin, yes, but it's not the same word. Well, it's broken up from these two. And he got me to be fascinated with a dictionary. Do you know, I do something that very few people do. I love to pick up a dictionary and just open it at random and start reading words and their origins. I love it. I remember David Bowie once said, "Don't you just love the Oxford Dictionary? Isn't it just like the greatest book ever?" And I'm not the only one who gets passionate about it, but I love words. I love etymology. I find it fascinating because when you think about, we spend so much of our time talking about our differences. We talk about the differences of race, of politics, of religion, of class. But the reality is there's more similarities between us than there are differences. As I found, this is the wonderful thing I found about my life with traveling around. And I do think that for a lot of people, there is, again, oh, well, Duncan was very special. He could read at an early age. I started playing music when I was about 3. But then again, it would be because I saw others play and I wanted to do that. Now, I went the traditional classical route. But truth said, by the time I was 15, I was bored out of my brain. This was not where I was passionate about progressive rock. That was my passion. I can remember getting excited by bands like Traffic, Jethro Tull. I can remember watching Jethro Tull on the television for the first time and my mother going, "Oh, what is this rubbish?" And just being, "Oh, it's brilliant, don't you see?" And having a conversation with her, "It's not music." And that became my passion. But over the years, I've moved into opera, I've moved into musical theatre, I've moved into rock, into pop, even into rap, into jazz. And I've always said with music, I love anything that is well produced and communicates. And I don't narrow it down, in the spectrum of a specific style.
During the workshop, you repeat one thing. You say that music is language.
Yeah.
And music is all about social conventions that we make.
Yeah.
Can you please a little explain about that? Why is it so? And did it change with time? Or is it something like quintessentially?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize, when we're talking about, how did music shift from being something which everyone did? It was natural, it was normal, it was, if you look at the writings of the ancient Greeks, they say, well, how can you teach astronomy without understanding dance? How can you teach mathematics without an understanding of music? It was like they didn't separate out the subjects. But by the time we hit the period of about the beginning of the 5th century, round about the year 400, whatever have you, you have certain things happening in Europe. The church, the early Christian church, is struggling for survival. It's struggling for survival because there are other religions that are competing. There's still a strong element of paganism. But the main struggle that is occurring is within the church itself. There are so many different sects of Christianity, so many different flavors, styles, differences of opinion. You give an example. There was a person called Arius, Arius. It's called the Arian controversy. And basically, what was this all about? Is God the Father equal in status to God the Son? Now, today, we would call that a theological argument. And, oh, that's interesting. There were people meeting in the street with swords fighting each other because of these differences of opinion. The early church would not have survived unless it had put in firm rules about what is accepted church viewpoints and what is not. So what started to happen was anything that fell outside of that was thought about as being heretical. When you start making a religion, any religion, very dogmatic and saying this is accepted, this is not accepted, what happens to the music connected to that religion? Aha. So we also get the same circumstance happening to music. Now, music is to be reserved. to be kept exclusive for the worship of God. How can you use music to worship God and then that night use it for a party? You've demeaned its value as a means to worship God. Now, I don't want to just isolate the church. By the time we get to the beginning of the 12th century, we have the advent of what are called the troubadours, the minstrels, people who would make their living playing music for the entertainment of the aristocracy. But how did you become a minstrel? Well, you had to join the union. It was literally a guild. It was a 7-year apprenticeship. You would have to learn, you would have to train under a master. You would have to cook for him, wash his clothes, do whatever he said, as he gradually revealed the mysteries of music. And so you go down through the years with music not becoming more accessible to people, but reduced further and further to a class of people who were the specialists. You know, by the time you reach the great court composers, Haydn, Mozart, none of these people were paid like a rock star today. They were servants. Most of them didn't make enough money to survive on. So what did they do? They taught. Okay. Now you come to me, Dimitri, and you say, I'd like to learn. You're a professional. I would like to learn to play the violin. And you start to play, and oh, Dimitri is very good. Oh, he's very good. Very good. Oh, very good. I had better be careful. I think Dimitri will be taking away my job if I am not careful. So what do we start to move towards? We move more and more and more towards keeping music as a specialist language for a select group of people. This argument I have, what my whole viewpoint of teaching is, the more people that can speak the language, the better it is for those people, but the better it is for musicians, because it increases the number of people that understand the language.
For sure, for sure. Do you have any maybe criticism, but maybe it's a wrong word? What's your vision about what's happening in music today?
I think the biggest problem that's happening in music today is the same problem that's happening in films and in books and a lot of areas, which is, instead of pushing the barriers, instead of expanding, everyone's playing it very safe. If you look at Hollywood today, Hollywood has become an industry of sequels. Oh, we've made that film before, let's remake it again. Okay, now we're going to remake it one more time. Now let's remake it with a slightly different cast. And this has also become very much the same with music today, which is everyone goes for the safe bet. Okay, yes, the music is not memorable. It is very disposable. You'll probably forget about it in a year, but it's current and it works in the clubs for now. And okay, I mean, if you look at the Beatles, everyone forgets they were amazing as a band. But for every great Beatles song you now remember, 3 were put into the trash can. And even the ones that they recorded, if you go and look, I mean, it's something like, 400 Beatles songs over their career. Most people will be hard pushed to remember 30 or 40 of them. And even if you heard them again, you go, oh, that's the Beatles. Oh, I don't think I've heard that one before. And so even on their albums, you have to remember that for everything that comes out that's brilliant, that shapes your world, that you go, wow, that's memorable. What a great melody. Oh, that was really pushing the barriers. There's a whole bunch that gets pushed to one side. And I think this is key. I often talk about this. Elton John, I read an interview one time, and I'm not certain of the truth of this, but it wouldn't surprise me. He writes 2 songs every morning before breakfast. Now, not the words, because he's never written lyrics. He has a lyricist, but the music. 2 songs. If he wants breakfast, he has to come up with a couple of songs. Now, let's just stop for a second. Let's just pretend that is true. If that's true, and he puts out an album every 3 years, that means when he puts out an album with 10 new songs on, he gets to pick 10 songs out of, 1,000 that he's created. And you wonder why he's had a successful career, for nearly 50 years. One of the things I teach in my composition seminar is only from quantity comes the ability to select quality. And this is something that flies totally in the face of the traditional approach to any art. If you go to a college to study painting or sculpture or architecture or music, what are you told? You're told, don't present something unless it's of an astounding quality. So what does that actually do to a creator? It restricts. When you look at someone like Picasso was a stunning artist. If you ever looked at any of his realistic work prior to the Cubism, prior to everything else, I mean, he didn't draw that way. He didn't paint that way because he couldn't paint pictures. He was already brilliant in, and then what happens later in his life? He stops painting and focuses on sculpture. Why? Because he's not finding enough challenges with his painting and now has entered a whole new world to create with. And I think this is true for any great artist. You know, it's quantity, quantity, quantity. You say, you know, if you were an artist, let's talk about a bricklayer. Can you imagine someone who lays bricks for a living and says, okay, I've laid one perfect brick today. No more, no more, that's it. I have to wait for the inspiration before I lay another brick. Yeah, he'd be a very starving bricklayer, you know. It's all about create, 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 create. And then if you're lucky, some of what you create, somebody else goes, we love that. But it doesn't mean that everything you create is going to be at that level.
For sure. I actually saw that it's applicable to the whole way children are taught and nurtured, because I remember when I was a kid and I tried to tell my father a joke and I forgot it. And my father was after a heavy hangover, so he wasn't really angry at me, but he just said, if you're not sure what you want to say, just don't say it ever.
Yeah.
And after this, it was such a great stress that I still remember that
Yeah,
up
I
to
mean,
this
it's
day.
like, what do we do when children give us pictures and paintings? You know, people put them up on your fridge. Yeah, we'll stick them on the fridge. Can you imagine how you could destroy a child's creative abilities by saying, now, Johnny, thank you for that picture, but I'm afraid it's not of a standard that I can put that on the fridge. It does not come up to the same level as some of your earlier work. Well, guess what's going to happen to that kid? That's it. I'm never putting crayons on paper again. You know, and I think this is something that every parent has to recognize. A child doesn't often have the ability to give in any other area than in their creativity. You know, when a child, I'll give you an example. You're watching television and your 3-year-old brings the television remote to you. Now, if you don't respond by saying, well, thank you so much for that. I was just thinking that I was really, really wanting to get that, and you helped. And the child feels, I contributed, I gave something, right? You know, if a child gives you one of their toys, they're giving you something of their own, right? This is a big deal. This would be like me saying, Dimitri, I'm giving you my car. Why? I want to say thank you. Have my car. Now that, you see, you would go, wow, Duncan, whoo. But this is what the child is doing when they hand you a toy or when they hand you a picture or when, you know, and you know this as a father. This is, and what do we do with our children? So often the biggest problem we have is we don't have the time to focus on these little actions. We're all busy. We're all, yeah. And the worst thing in the world today, I hate this with an intensity like you can't believe, are families that sit around the table for a meal and they all are having their cell phones, iPads, whatever have you. This is the killer. This is the killer. A culture that, I'm going to give you a quote because I love it. If your listeners haven't read this book, they should do. and that's George Orwell, 1984. And if I'm right in the year, it was 1937, 1938 that he wrote this. I might be a little off, but I think that's the year. And there was a quote in there where he says, "The people will not revolt. They will not look up from their screens long enough to notice what is going on." Oh my God. He wrote that 80 years ago. And if you look at society today, what do you see? I mean, it's amazing. This is what we've got to do as a culture. We have to put more investment in the community. This is what music's about. The more, music, painting, dance, acting, all of this is one of the wonderful things about the Russian people. It's true. As I travel around the world and you look at the aesthetic demand that the Russian people have for arts in general, it's much, much higher than in many countries. And one of the reasons is if you've been in a situation where you haven't had it, you know what, as a culture, is the importance of having it. It's like education. One of the problems in my adopted country, America, is it's my right to have an education. Go to Africa. See how an African child treats their education. It's not a right, it's a privilege, and you still see, the difference between people who have a demand for aesthetics, for art, for education, and the importance of it. And this is where we have it. And it's, filling your, I mean, if the number of people who will go on their Facebook or some other medium and spend Instagram or Twitter and spend a whole 2-3 hours filling their minds with information that they have literally forgotten about an hour later, instead of going and picking up a book or going to an art gallery and interacting. This is art, Dimitri. It's not art unless there is some interaction between the audience and the artist. If you think about that, if you think about going to an art gallery, people once, I've been asked this, well, how do you, with modern art, or with modern painting or modern music, or how do you tell if it's good or not? Really simple. Let's imagine we're walking through an art gallery and you walk past a picture and you go, oh, I kind of like that. Okay, that was a reaction. Or you walk past and you go, oh, what a pile of rubbish. That was an interaction. What is the only thing you never want audience to do with a picture? Walk right past it. And if you want to know what is art, that is art. That's the quality. Is there an audience involvement? Now you can see, where does an Elton John or a Beatles or a Lady Gaga or whoever it might be, where do they succeed where others do not? And it's with audience interaction.
This was how they communicate, right?
Yeah. I think too many people are worried about, well, what are you saying? That doesn't matter. It's not what you're saying. It's not that everything has to make a point. It has to be earth-shattering. It's the fact that got your interest, you interacted, it made you think.
Right. I totally agree with you. How people can find information about you? I mean, do you do workshops online as well? Or because what I found on the Russian internet, or what I could find from here, is that you give workshops in Russia, and then in Riga, but I haven't found anything else. Can you please share how people can reach out?
People can always go to my website, which is www.understanding of music. So it's just no spaces, understandingofmusic.com. And if they go to that site, the first thing they'll see is a TED lecture. If you don't know about TED, TED, it's basically a lecture series created by innovators in their areas, and they're done all over the world. I did this one in Venice. It's only about 12 minutes long. So if people want to see what I do and how I do it, they'll get a direct link to that. And then also on there's explanations about what each seminar I deliver does and their schedule with direct links to the organizers all over the world. I mean, look, this year, where am I off to? Good grief. I'm going to be doing a composition seminar here next week in Boston. And then I'm going to Riga in Latvia. I'm going to Cluj-Napoca in Romania, Budapest in Hungary, Vienna in Austria, Berlin and Stuttgart in Germany. I am going to be going to London. And next year, I'm going to return to Malaga in Spain. I mean, people say to me, are you ever at home? You should ask my wife that. I'm traveling about 8 months of each year.
Oh.
And that, I've got to say to you, I love teaching. I love sharing what I do with people. But living out of a suitcase, traveling economy everywhere because business class fares are just too expensive unless you're corporate. And that's really hard. I mean, there was a time when flying was a very exciting, it's like these days, it's like you get on the plane and the whole time you're thinking, when can I get off? Doing the flight, when I go from here to New Zealand, that's 31 hours door to door. I know. After the first 10 hours, you kind of go, I'm done. Oh, how do I get off? And it's like, only another 21 hours to go.
It's a lot.
But having said that, when you end up speaking to 50 or 60 or even 100 people, and you see the life change that these people are going through. And if you've got a second, I'm going to explain to you what people say to me, what is your product, Duncan? What is it you're trying to do? And you would say, well, he's trying to teach music. No, that's the byproduct. That's the also bonus. So what is the actual thing I'm doing? So I'll describe this story and then it'll make things much more sense. When I was about 19, which has got to be for at least 10 years ago now. When I was 19, I took a clipboard and I went out into shopping malls over the course of 2 weeks and I interviewed people. This was all off of my own decision. And the question that I asked was this: when you were younger, what goals or dreams did you have for your life? That was it. And I wrote down everything people said. Sometimes somebody would answer one thing. Sometimes they would give 7 or 8 things. And it would be things like, oh, I wanted to be a cosmonaut. I wanted to be a train driver, or I wanted to become a scientist and find a cure for a major disease, or I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 29. Anyway, I tabulated, I wrote down all the answers. Now, I didn't quite do 10,000 people, but I did 8,700 people, which is a lot of talking, as you can imagine. 8,700 people, and I tabulated.
Nobody paid you for that. You just did it on
No,
your
this
own.
is just my own thing. I would go up to somebody and say, "I'm good morning. I'm from the Lorien Institute of Musical Research and Studies." Just made up the name, and of course, people, oh, well, if that's where you're from, certainly. And could I take up 30 seconds of your time to ask a simple question? So, what was the number one tabulated answer out of all the answers that I was given? Now, it doesn't mean this was the highest in everyone, but this one was on every single. So 71% of the people said, learn to play an instrument. What was the second highest thing? 30%. And that was to make lots of money. Now, Think about that for a second. Random survey, thousands of people. The number one thing in terms of one of the things you want to do in your life is play an instrument. Not by a small margin, by a huge margin. Which is the reason, actually, I decided to create my workshops and seminars. So, here's the answer to what is my actual product. When you talk to people about learning music, or they say, oh, I'd love to have done that, but it's too late now. I'm too old. Or I didn't have the opportunity, or I don't have the right shaped hand. My fingers I've got this funny finger that doesn't do that, or what, I can't hold a note. Whatever excuse they give. You take people for 4 days. You change that viewpoint. Now, what starts to happen? They've done the seminar. They have this shift of their viewpoint. I thought I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't do that. And in 4 days, I find I can do that. What happens to all the other things I had on my list?
They become possible. They become possible.
And when you take somebody's dreams and goals from when they were young, and you remind them that they could still do those things, not that they have to, but that they could still do them, you are taking the best part of a human being and you are giving that power again. So if you want to know why I do what I do, it's like your experience. It changes lives. You're teaching music. I could be teaching, I don't know, gardening, cooking, origami. The music is the vehicle I chose because so many people have a passion for that idea. And why is that? Maybe you can't speak English, or you can't speak Russian, or you can't speak Spanish, or German, or Swahili, but you can sit down at an instrument and you can convey your emotions in a way that immediately connects you to millions of people around the world. That is a way to bring people together. It reinforces our similarities, not our differences.
Duncan, I wish you could be duplicated. Or some gene could be taken, and you're an amazing teacher. I would like to share with you, just really quickly, that I initially created this podcast because I had an honor to translate for, I don't know, for at least 50 different teachers from different traditions, like Buddhist teachers, Tantra teachers, like everyone. When I met you, even though you're teaching music, you're conveying also something on a very different level. And when I realized what it is, and when my wife also felt it, we were on both of your workshops that you gave in Moscow that time. So my wife immediately invited some of her clients, and 4 people joined us for the second seminar because we saw how transformational it is. You do an amazing job. I don't know how you do this magic, but yeah, you're one of a kind for sure.
There's a concept here, which is this. Are you trying to appear to be interesting? Or are you interested in the people you are talking to? Now, obviously, what I'm saying here is, yes, I'm interested. And if you wanted to put your finger on what it is that separates those artists who we think of as great artists from other artists. It's that ability, it's that caring, it's that interest, it's that desire. You know, if you can go to watch somebody perform, and they'll do all the right things. They'll you know, very nice show, but you walk away unmoved. You were never in communication with that performer. That's true whether you're talking about music, whether you're talking about painter, whether you're talking about a sculptor. You know, I mean, who was it that said? Was it Leonardo who said? I think it was Leonardo that said, "I do not carve the angel into the stone. I release the angel that is inside." Now, if it wasn't Leonardo, it was someone like, and it's like, yes, that's exactly the concept. You know, who are you talking to? You're talking to the being. You're not talking to all the trappings that a person gains throughout the years. You know, I always think this is a good example. What happens when a teacher says, a parent, give me a really good idea? Well, what immediately happens? You know, the gates close. Oh, God, a really good idea. Yes, come up with a really good idea for all the rest of your classmates to paint. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, no, whatever I come up with, not everyone's going. A really good idea. It's, as you know, you go to work. You go to work for your employer. Come on, Dimitri, you got a good idea to how we can make our business more successful? Oh, whatever I say, what are people going to think of me? What will they? And the whole thing becomes, I don't want to commit, because what if what I commit to is not thought of as being worthy by others? The way to handle that is not to say, come up with a really good idea. It's to say, give me an idea, 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 give me an idea. And all of a sudden, one of those ideas that come up with, you're going to go, give me an idea, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I like that one. That, by definition, is a really good idea. Why? Because it didn't just bring about an emotional reaction in someone else, it also brought about an emotional reaction in you. But the way to do that is not by, you know, stay there unmoving, look in your inner soul, find something that is worthy to communicate to the rest of the human beings on the planet. You'll never move. You'll never come up with that thing. But when you get to the idea that you can do things in such quantity that the quality is unimportant, it's just quantity, 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 quantity. And then from that quantity comes the ability to select the quality. And that's a very unconventional approach, unfortunately. And I think it's a rule not only for how you improve artists in colleges, I think it's also a way for improving relationships with your own children. It's not quality, it's quantity. You know, have you ever thought about, now, do you draw, Dimitri?
Just a little.
Okay, now here's a good test. Ask anyone who, quote, says they can't draw to draw a picture of a face. Do you know what they're going to draw a picture of? It doesn't matter if that person is 35 years old. They're going to draw a picture with the same level of skill at the point of where they gave up drawing. So you're going to get someone who's 35 years old drawing a face like a 7-year-old. It's going to have those big eyelashes coming out. The nose is going to look kind of funny. It's just going to be a front-on two-dimensional approach. There's not. Or you might get someone who kind of does a 3/4 profile. They've got a little bit of training, and it might be a bit better. But that person will draw. It's the same. Draw me a picture of a house. Oh, and what will you see? You know, there will be the house, and there's the windows with the little curtains, and the chimney with the smoke coming off, and the garden path, and there'll probably be a sunshine in the background. They'll draw at the exact point where they finally accumulated enough invalidation to say, I'm not ever going to draw again. And I think that's true, not just for drawing, I think that's true for every subject. When I talk about invalidation, it's a killer. I mean, music, if you want to sing, do you know, I've never met someone who can't sing, ever. Ever, 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 ever. 40,000 people, not one person. Oh, no, you hasn't heard me. I'm talking about people who grunt when they come into a workshop. But what do you find? One for one. Oh, yeah, well, I used to sing in the shower, but my mum used to sort of shout at me and knock on the shower door. Will you cut that racket up? I can't think to myself. I started to learn the violin, and then my parents told me to go and practice in the neighbour's yard because I was stopping, dad from relaxing at night. Or, I mean, it's just you accumulate enough where you become introverted and you no longer want to express yourself. And that's the key. That's part of what I do in the workshops. Look, in 4 days, you're doing scales, you're doing chords, you're doing simple jazz improvisation, simple blues improvisation, you're reading music. You're actually able to read Bach and play hands together very slowly, but understanding exactly what you're doing. And you're doing this in 4 days. Even if you walked into that workshop saying, I don't know which end of a guitar to blow in. I mean, it doesn't matter. Now, if you can achieve that in 4 days, what happens to your confidence level? The problem is that the traditional runway, and people say, well, is what you're doing coming to replace the teachers and the No! I'm not interested in people who are the professionals who want to go the traditional route. I'm interested in the man and the woman in the street, the average person who says, I missed out. That's my public. I'm not interested in the 1% who go for training. I'll take the other 99.
Yeah. I remember I was really amazed when you gave us some stats of how many people actually graduate from universities, like music colleges. The percentage, as far as I remember, is so small that it just strikes how
You
people even
have to
started.
remember it is a difference, though, in a country like Russia, where there is a requirement for an ability level necessary for entering into that system. So there is you could call it a weeding out process that occurs to get in to a college in Russia. In countries like America, anyone can go if they have the money. So the weeding out process occurs as you go through. And actually, it can be as low as 10%. 1 out of every 10 that graduate. Now, you won't find that in Russia, but then you have to demonstrate a very good aptitude in order to get in. So it's a different process, but it produces the same effect. I just think that the most important thing is not to determine what the person wants to do with the language. Get them to speak the language. That's it. And, maybe all that person has ever wanted to do is, I just want to do that song, Paparazzi by Lady Gaga. That's it. And you go, okay. And what do you want to do after that? No, that's it. That's it. That's all. If I could do that, I would be a happy person with music. Okay. And maybe that person does it and then wants to go on. But maybe that person goes, I've done it. Thank you. I'm all set. Now, who am I to turn around and judge that person as saying, why did the person not go on to study Tchaikovsky? What's the problem? That is the choice of the individual. You do not forbid a language to somebody because they're not going to turn into a Shakespeare or a Tolstoy.
You're absolutely right. Duncan, one last question to ask. If people, I mean, one of the possibilities, that's something I strongly advise everyone, is to attend your workshop. But is there a place where people can start to learn music on their own, just to test waters, to try a little bit, to
If
see?
they go to the website I mentioned earlier on, www.understandingofmusic, one word, understandingofmusic.com, there's a 1-hour free lesson on board that website. People can go to it. They'll get instructed on their note names. for the keyboard. They get instructed on playing some scales, on some chords, and it's all free. And there's no obligation. They can just go and do that. And it's also true for the Russian website. You can advise your listeners.
I'll leave the link.
Yes. My interest is not in selling a workshop to people. And I just want to explain on that. It would be lovely if somebody could work for free. But we all have mortgages to pay. We all have, we all have cars to run. We all have wives who would like to go out occasionally and be treated like a special person. So we all have bills to pay. But if you can't do it for free, you've got to try and keep it to a financial level where you can actually make it work. But my interest is not in the making of the money. My interest is in the expansion of the number of people interested in the arts. And I say the arts in general, not just music, the arts in general. Because if you look at a culture is either expanding or contracting. It's always been that way. Every great empire that has come and vanished has vanished. And the biggest signs of the diminishing of that empire has always been in the area of the arts. When you see arts and education being suppressed, demeaned, made less of, then you see the end of that culture, a big warning sign. And it's like, it always strikes me the same way with America. America's an empire. It's a different type of empire. It's not the same as the British Empire or the Ottoman Empire. But it's an empire. Why? It's, you might get, Yankee go home, but leave your blue jeans. We like the blue jeans. Oh, and the McDonald's. We like McDonald's is good. Madonna, yeah, she's all right. We like that. So what America is a cultural empire, and it spreads through its culture. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but when you look at the future, and archaeologists are digging up remnants from this period of time, what do you think they're going to be thinking themselves 20, 30, 40,000 years in the future? Now, I wonder what this big yellow M is. Well, they used to come here for some kind of sacrificial meal and they used to sometimes be given little plastic mementos to take away with them. And they all used to dress in a similar uniform, which was basically some form of cotton material, which was blue with little rivets in. And they are, you look at our culture and it's like, what are we leaving? Is the culture growing or is it diminishing? Because nothing in this universe stays the same. Nothing. It's either expanding or contracting. So if we look at this and we say our culture is not expanding, then by definition, who are the only people who can make a culture expand? It's its artists. Why did man go to the moon? Man didn't go to the moon because it was a race between two superpowers. Man went to the moon because a guy called Jules Verne wrote a novel in 1899 where he talked about, sending people in a rocket to the moon. And 90% of what he talked about in that novel, turned out to be factual. But it was a dream dreamed by an artist. And this is why I think artists are so important. Artists set the goals, the dreams, the aspirations. The scientists and the engineers make them a reality. But without the visionaries, you don't have a culture.
That's an amazing note to finish our conversation. Duncan, yeah, my thank you will not be enough. I really thank you from all of my heart.
You're so welcome, Dimitri. And it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.